want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another episode of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. We actually finished a chapter last time, and I'm not sure whether we left off with a cliffhanger or we didn't. Depends on how we look at the book, I suppose. Our next chapter, which will be chapter 16, I call The Vials of Wrath. And it starts out, there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And of course, that's Daniel 12:1. I look at these vials being released by the 7 angels as being vials of purification, which are going to touch the deep levels of the subconscious mind. Most of us are not aware of these patterns that exist within us, that have been woven from the very first moment that creation began. We've mentioned this in other episodes, that it is this, the subconscious, which is that great and powerful sea where unknown and intangible forces seem to come at us in unexpected moments, because we have no memory of the beginning of creation. And yet it is written in every cell of our body. There are reasons why one is a great composer, or another one is a teacher, or another one goes into politics, or a great artist, or a great writer. We are not what we are by happenstance, but because it was intended for us to be what we are. And I think that's when we find true happiness. You know, one of the questions that has always been asked me is, how do you go about to achieve this? We covered this in a method in which Jesus taught when he lived upon earth, which was taught, of course, in the Gospel of Peace, which we did in Mystic Christianity. But the path to God is so simple. And I remember Einstein when he once said that when an answer is simple, you're hearing God think. And I'm saying to you that the path to God is so simple that we have trouble in finding it. In the first place, we have moved God into an omnipotent and omnipresent situation. In other words, yes, we can understand perhaps that the universe of the stars is in God, that that's a suit of clothes which he wears. We can also understand when it manifests in someone like Jesus or John the Beloved, manifest in those that have gone through this purgation, or shall we say, the resurrection of the dead. We can understand that too. But to put ourselves as an aspect of God, having our potentiality having existed since the beginning of time, And that because we are such an intricate part of Him, we also have a personal part of Him that is inside of us. And sometimes we have related to a master. Well, we have 1 billion Christians that relate to Jesus as a master. There are thousands and thousands that relate to Krishna in India or Buddha in Buddhism. But the last place that we're really going to look is inside of ourselves. If we really want to open the doorway which leads us to the resurrection of the dead, the important ingredient is to come into contact with that part of God that lives in you. It has to be a personal relationship between you and God. It is hard to imagine, perhaps for some people, that this very personal relationship actually links us with the entire universe and puts at God's disposal that part of Him in us, enables Him to bring us everything from the angelic kingdom to the lessons that are necessary in order to complete this remarkable transformation. My relationship started very simply. Many people have heard the story that kind of started me on the path. But I just wanted to see God. I wanted to see Him more than anything in the world. Enough, perhaps, that I was even willing to try to die for Him. I wasn't certain I could, because I felt that to do that might require more courage than I had. But I told Him that I would be happy to do this. And the worst death I could think of was going and laying on a railroad track and letting the train run over me. And I said, I don't know whether I have that kind of courage, God, but I will try. I wrote Him letters, and if I made clothing, I made it or bought it for Him. I thought of Him at night, and I thought of Him in the morning, and I took Him in the eye of my mind, or in my mental meditations. I took Him gifts, things that I thought might please Him, things of earth which I thought perhaps others had not taken Him, like, for instance, a 4-leaf clover, or to create a Christmas tree. I still create a Christmas tree for God every Christmas. I try to start a month before Christmas, and I try and carefully to build it over something that represents all of the beauties that He has given us in nature. This finally spawned into one of the most remarkable relationships. And I knew then that it was there for all people who could just simply love enough to open that doorway to Him, to develop the personal as well as the omnipotent and omnipresent. So the simple process of meditation was the process that I used in opening the doorway. Every day at the same time, I never allowed outside circumstances to ever take me away from that time that I spent with God. Every day at the same hour, I used to go, and I had no idea what God looked like. For all I knew, He was a man in long white robes and a long beard. Of course, I was to learn as the mind merged with the consciousness of the universe that He is consciousness without form. But in those days when I sought Him so diligently, I didn't know that. And I wanted a master teacher, someone to teach me to be like Christ is. And so I thought about all the master teachers that had ever lived, and I thought they had one thing in common. God was their master. So I selected God as my master teacher, and every day I would go up, close my eyes, and go up in consciousness to sit at His feet as a student would sit at a teacher's feet. I guess that I became so intense in the search that I finally one day found Him walking on my path. So you see, it's very simple. It's just a simple matter of love. and dedication. So you might try that little simple process of meditation. You don't have to have him as a master. To you, he may be a father or a friend, or maybe he's just a being that is so awesome up there that just to have a personal contact with him is alone sufficient. But that's a simplicity. I think of those words that Jesus once said, you must be as a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I have found in my students, if there's ever been one restriction, it has always been they felt not worthy, or that they just couldn't get there, that they were human. Well, since we are an aspect of God, it's pretty hard to bypass him. So that's how I got there, and I hope that will be enough for you. I once met a woman who said, Elizabeth, you should meditate. And I said, what's that? She said, oh, think. I said, well, what should I think about? She says, oh, Jesus or Buddha or something. So that was the only lesson I ever had in meditation. I didn't pick God first. I picked Jesus, and I used to meditate on him about 1.5 hours a day. Then one day this great light appeared over his shoulder, and there I went, off with the God of the universe. And I hope that you will, because this journey of transformation, a future that is without loss of continuity, to live and know that infinity is only tomorrow, is a wonderful and glorious way to live, and a glorious thing to realize. So I don't want the 7 angels with their 7 vials to run you off. That's what I'm trying to say. So we will go with the vials of wrath, and I'm going to just go to the board for a moment so that we can review that subconscious mind, that final purification that takes place in the soul. A subconscious mind is kind of like a suit of clothes which the soul wears too. It wears a physical body, and it wears feelings and emotions, but it also has upon it layer after layer of the subconscious. So I'm going to kind of put it this way, and of course, as usual, we're reviewing something that you've had so many times. But here we go again. Remember, the physical body is bound by the 4 elements. Kind of when we put ourselves in bondage of those 4 elements to produce a physical body, it's kind of like a crucified person on a cross. And then we had around us these feelings, the part that allows us to know the feelings of others, to feel love and to feel hate. And we feel hatred only because we have to feel it in order to overcome it. Because hatred has no place in the world of God, only love. So we do have these feelings. The feelings and emotions is another one of the very subtle bodies. We do have these emotions too, that we are able to have feelings, emotions which involve understanding of our children, a love for our children. And through our children, we learn to expand the love from self-love to a more selfless love, or family love. And that is why families are so necessary, is because we evolve through this process. As we can learn to love our family, we then stretch our liking and our understanding to our jobs and the people that are around us. From the jobs, we stretch them out ultimately to a city. And then from a city, we're going to stretch out to a nation. From a nation, we'll stretch out to encompass the whole of earth. And from the whole of earth, we will encompass the universe. I always said that I gave up my life for God. He gave me a city. I gave up the city, and he gave me a nation. I gave up the nation for him, and he gave me the world. As most of you know, I toured internationally for 17 years. And when I gave up the world, he gave me the universe of the stars. And I find the absolute and most complete freedom being alone in a room, in a chair, of having unlimited shall I say, unlimited, no, what I'm trying to say in unlimited is no boundaries. When I often write, I am my freest. And yet perhaps I would be considered to be in the greatest of prisons. But that is because consciousness can never be fettered or confined by the human body, or even by our human surroundings. So we do have our bodies, our feelings and our emotions, and we have a lower mind, the part that allows us to function upon earth. And then, of course, all this is contained in the soul, as we have drawn before. But that's not why we're focusing on this so much today. We want to take a look at this vast sea. That is SEA, by the way. That vast sea that exists between this lower body, which we now know is our Satan and our dragon, our lesser self, and then the soul is out here. But involved are these layers and layers and layers of memory patterns in our consciousness, which comes from the beginning of time. And I think we mentioned this before too, that psychology and psychiatry today, as they pierce the subconscious mind, going back only to as far as the memory patterns or the vague memory patterns of childhood, have not yet opened Pandora's box to pierce the deep inroads of all that is written there. That is in psychology and psychiatry of tomorrow. It will no longer be necessary to have scream therapy or to take a person through the process of anger and all this to bring out the hidden things within them. You'll just simply be able to look at a person and know exactly why they became the way they are. Before this earth shall pass away, before every man, woman, and child has finished their lives here upon earth, we will have no deceit between one another. It will be impossible, because in our unity we will know the consciousness of every form of life. And we will not mind in those days, because you see, I don't think we'll have anything to hide anymore. I think we'll live in honesty and integrity and love and understanding. And when all that is done, then we'll write a final page to human history. So this vast sea has layer after layer. And now as we go into some of the purifications of these 7 vials, in part it is the subconscious mind, this multitude of layers that rests upon the soul. You see, when we leave the body, some people call it die, but I'm fully aware we never die, that we only take off a suit of clothes. But when all of these and pass on, or we leave it, now let me just erase it here. Say the body has gone into the state we know is death. And so we don't have feelings and emotions as we have them here, because those are bound pretty much as protective shells for the human body itself. But we still are what we are, wearing the suit of clothes of the layers of the subconscious mind. So all the patterns in here still represent what we are. And as long as there is a subconscious mind that exists between us and God, we are really not one. So all of this must be cleaned and purified. Now, you're going to like some of the things you discover, because you're going to find out what your real purpose in the universe of the stars is. You're going to find out that you're well prepared for it, and that the circumstances that you were born into has well prepared you for that life. You'll find it's the thing you've desired in the deepest of your heart. I often have students who want to know, or shall I say, who seek to fulfill a greater destiny than that of just being human. And I tell them that what is the closest thing to their heart is probably what they're supposed to be. because God has endowed us with a love to do what we're supposed to, a love to do good. So watch out as you walk through this purification. You're going to find out that the worst of you is on earth, and that the best of you is hidden in the portals of those doorways that are hidden in that deep and bottomless sea. Of course, there's going to be some junk there too, and that's always painful to clean up. But nevertheless, you'll find your talents, a reason why you have been. And there will be one day, if you came from the most dysfunctional home in the world, you'll bless every experience that happened to you, because it made you what you are. Keep those things in mind as we start preparing for the last and final battle of the apocalypse, which always sounds the most trying. St. John of the Cross, when he wrote Dark Night of the Soul, wrote about two dark nights. The first one being the dark night of the senses, which many people entered into, and then the second one being the dark night of the spirit. And I equate a lot of the purification of the soul as being a part of that second dark night, or the dark night of the spirit. Once again, remember, dark night means we're in embryonic form within the womb of God, being born from a caterpillar to a butterfly, undergoing this same remarkable transformation that the caterpillar goes through. So, let us go on into chapter 16. It said the time, I wrote here in Odyssey, the time has come for the soul's final purification. So if we can go to chapter 16 and verse 1. And I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the seven angels, go your ways and pour out the vials of wrath of God upon earth. And when it talks about the vials of wrath, we mentioned this last week, God is never angry. But the vials of wrath means the vials of purification that will separate the wheat from the shaft and blow away these impurities that bring us separations and war, and to keep only that which is good. So it's kind of like, I remember on the farm we used to have these huge thrashing machines come in, and they would thrash the wheat, and the wheat would stand in sacks, and the husk would be blown away. And so this is what's taking place now, is God is like the thrash machine, coming in and whisking the husk away and keeping the wheat. And the first went and poured his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the sea, grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worship the beast. And by now we know that the mark of the beast means we do not see clearly. It is darkness and unknowingness. And when we follow the path of the beast, we're following the path of worldly ways, with little understanding or knowing who and what we really are, who, what, and why the human race even exists. And the second angel, by the way, and it's called a noisome and grievous sore primarily because until all these things are purified, it just keeps on, one thing after another, until we have taken care of it, purified it, and put it where it belongs, in the past. For it is not a part of us any longer. This is really a rebirth process. And whatever was in the past doesn't make any difference anymore. That is going away. The second angel poured his vial upon the sea. And you know what that is? That's the subconscious mind. And so he poured it upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man. And every living soul died in the sea. And of course, what it's talking about here is that the blood of a dead man means that the mortal or corporeal nature is dying of the worldly ways and being born anew to divine ways. And so now the sea becoming as blood means it's dying. All those subconscious memory patterns are passing away. and dying. So, and it said every living soul died in the sea. Well, of course, that doesn't mean the soul, of course, which is immortal, doesn't mean it died. It is only dying of its corporeal senses and feelings and emotions. And it dies in the old way of life, dies in this purification of this great sea of the subconscious. By the way, it's a remarkable battle. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers. And if you remember rivers, that's thoughts. And fountains of water, which is, of course, like the mind. The mind is like a vast, kind of like an ocean in some ways. And rivers kind of feed into this. So he poured the vial upon the river, or thoughts that spring up from the mind that lead us into trouble. And they become as blood, too. Blood is always a sacrifice, so that means they're going to die, too. The bad things. And I heard the angel of the waters say, "Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy." And blood represents the sacrifice of the personal life. As Jesus, when he said in the Eucharist, when "this is my blood which has been shed for thee," he's not talking about the crucifixion, which is going to take his life, but rather the sacrifice. He had no personal life. It belonged to his disciples and to mankind. So he himself did not have this. He had sacrificed the personal life that most people have with families and everything to help make this a better world than what it was. So the same thing now is that anyone and everyone that goes through the transformational change, I promise, will work for the good of earth. And so it becomes as blood or sacrifice. And I heard the angel of the water say, "Thou art righteous, O Lord, which are and which was and shall be, because you have judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and has given them blood to drink, for they are worthy." I'd like to read you kind of the way that this part, as it was written more when John came to Hawaii, as the details of the interpretation was worked out in breaking all the symbolism. "And I heard the voice of God speak from within the temple of the soul, saying to the seven purifying forces of cosmic order," remember that as love and power and wisdom, eternal life, creative work, and the peace that passeth all understanding, "Go your way and release the judgments upon the corporeal senses of mankind." And the first angel went forth and poured his vial upon the remaining impure aspects of the soul. And a great sorrow fell upon the soul because of its participation in those things which bound it to darkness and caused it to follow worldly enticements. And the second angel poured his vial upon the subconscious mind, causing the soul to view the balance of its improprieties. And these became as blood to the soul, until all things were made pure, and the last visages of mortality were exchanged for immortality. And the third angel poured his vial upon the mind, and the false ideals which caused the soul to wander in darkness were as blood flowing from a wound. And I heard him say, "You are righteous, Lord, who are, who was, who shall be, for your judgment is fair. For they have passed through the purification of the saints and prophets, and you have administered your purgation, because they are worthy." So remember always that when the door opens and you step into the portals of the resurrection of the dead, that you are worthy to do so. For those who are not ready, they will not have to enter on this day. That sometime, someplace they will, yes. That they will have to be in human form to do that, yes. But there is no reason to postpone it when the greatness in yourself is born simultaneously. So it means that when that doorway opens, it is because you are worthy for it to open. I heard another out of the altar say, "Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are your judgments." And we've talked about the law of cause and effect before. God has but one single plan. That one single plan encompasses the universe of the stars. They were born of Him. I find it the easiest to relate to it by understanding that the universe of the stars is the body of God, as my body is the body of my soul, or bears the body of my soul. So the universe of the stars bears the soul of God, the imprint. And so everything is bound to that one law which flows through all things. It brings us our cause and effect. Do wrong, we reap wrong. Do good, we reap good. So that is why it is said that God's judgment alone is absolute and righteous. And the fourth angel poured his vial upon the sun, and this always represents the body, because the sun gives life to all things that live upon earth. So when John speaks of the sun, he is normally speaking of the mortal world, or the human world upon which we live. And power was given to him to scorch men with fire, and that means to burn away those things that we are involved in our earthly nature, that is feeding this dragon and these two beasts, that is causing the body to do things that bring deterioration and old age, causing the mind to think impure thoughts, and causing these to hinder the process of the soul. So scorching means burning away everything that is bad. And the men were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. And what it means by blasphemy doesn't mean standing there and swearing at God or cursing him. It means that we continue to go on the way that is adverse to natural and cosmic law. In other words, we just keep working against or in opposition to that divine plan, even in spite of these things that have already happened to us. It isn't we want to go against the will of God, but we've had self-will for over 10 million years, and the old dragon doesn't die very easy. So it's very difficult, and that's what causes the fight. And obviously we're fighting what? Ourselves. When we come onto this great battlefield, it is the indwelling Christ in the soul fighting against all the ways of human life, which was in reality a cycle of necessity. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast. And you know what that is? That is the ego. Because when we're talking about the seat, we're talking about the very heart of what causes the problem. Pours his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was filled with darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. I just simply think that it's in being cut away from the light, being into the chrysalis stage, and being cut away from the light and going through that purification, it is that the kingdom is full of darkness. And yet, when I think about it now, was that not that darkness that the kingdom was filled with? Wasn't that darkness also light? I think so. Perhaps darkness and light are not so different after all. And of course they blasphemed God of heaven because their pains and their sores, and they didn't repent of their deeds. It's just very hard to change the way we act and the way we think. It's so much easier not to know what we think, but it's so much more fun to know. To harness the powers as Jesus had them, to raise the dead, heal the sick, and help the blind to see. You must be able to control the mind. And the mind must control the senses, and the senses must control the body, or you'll never possess those powers. Yet the potentiality for us to have these powers are all there. So we really, truly need to work upon these purifications. And someday the old habits pass into new ones, and it seems as natural to walk in a store and be happy, try to give happiness to every clerk as it is to give happiness to our family. It becomes natural. New habits are built. And the sixth angel poured his vial upon the great river of Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up in that way of the kings of the east, that the kings of the east might be prepared. And now we've passed away to some degree from the thoughts. We're still in the mind, because whenever we're dealing with a river, or we're dealing with an ocean, we're dealing with intellect, we're dealing with knowledge, we're dealing with thoughts. Before we were kind of looking at thoughts. Now we're looking at the river itself, which of course is like the mind. And it said the water was dried up, and that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And that means reborn, because the star of the east has always been the morning star, the star of new life, the beginning of daybreak, the dawn of a new beginning and a new day. So when it talks about the kings of the east, it's not talking about people necessarily coming from the east, or wise men who followed the star back in the time of the birth of Christ. It's saying that those being reborn or entering into the resurrection of the dead will rule over their lesser nature, and they are the kings of the east, kings of new life and rebirth. So, you're a king, or will be. It is difficult, I made a footnote here, it is difficult to reason that a soul which has entered into the resurrection of the dead would fight against the will of God and blame him for the price that must be paid in every insurrection. However, the soul has long followed self-will and finds that the state of possession by the Spirit is restrictive to those endeavors which follows the path of mortality. It is also aware that such divine intervention is the cause of its suffering. Therefore, it is not unnatural that the soul turns against those forces which are causing the purgation to occur. It's kind of like, let us say, for instance, chocolate cake. Very harmful to the body. There are about, I think it's 8 to 12 teaspoons of sugar in every slice of chocolate cake. Are we going to, if I tell you to quit eating chocolate cake, will you do that? Well, some of you might, others might not. And so, but when the Spirit descends to live in the flesh, knowing that if you eat chocolate cake, it's going to be harmful to the body, that he must inhabit during your sojourn for the balance of your journey through matter. So he stops you from eating the chocolate cake. And you say, but why should I stop eating chocolate cake? I like chocolate cake. He says, no chocolate cake. Now, I'm not running down chocolate cakes. I was just looking for something which would be simple enough for us to understand how hard it is for us to change from self-will and from the enticements of the material world. He might not even make you give up the whole piece. You might negotiate and agree that you could have a half a piece once a week on Friday. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. And we remember them well. Remember that the false prophet is self-will, that the dragon is the ego, and that the beast is the mind which the dragon feeds, which ego feeds. So now we have 3 frogs that's coming out, and that means, represents, of course, as always, 3 when John speaks of them, always represents the body and the soul and the spirit. So all these unclean frogs are coming out of, not so much the spirit this time, but the body and the mind and the soul. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth to the kings of earth and of the whole world, to gather them to do battle on the great day of the God Almighty. So it is saying these are the things that, these are the mind, the ego, the body, our physical, the physical things we do. These are the things that lead us out of harmony with the divine plan. So now they jump out because they are the things that we have followed throughout many generations. And you might say, gee, why would we follow them? Why didn't we do good all the time? We were born as infants, unable to walk. We had, as a process of this, to learn, to overcome. For every wrong that we do, we learn to do right. And thus it was that we were given an untamed world by which to learn our lessons. So we're going to find out that being human is not bad. We're going to find out that it was absolutely necessary for us to be human. Then he said, "Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." So it is saying those who prepare for the coming, those who began to purify their body and their mind and their soul for the great day when the indwelling Christ shall come forth out of the clouds of unknowingness to raise us with him from the dead. And he gathered them together into a place called the Hebrew tongue Armageddon, on the place of the great battle. I have always found this fascinating, and I'm going to a note here in front that explains a little bit from the frogs. It is said that although it is difficult to equate frogs to the impurities of the soul, mind, and body, these three plagues are the real essence of mankind's malevolent character and manifest in the ultimate human destruction. Of course, as we talked about, as these impurities come out of the mouth of the dragon and the ego and the false prophet, which is self-will, they lead mankind into its affection for worldly ways. Therefore, the soul now is taken to the great battlefield where it must review the violations and ultimately rise victorious. For this reason, the indwelling Christ cautions mankind to keep the soul's garment pure, lest it become naked and be revealed, meaning that if we do things good and kind, then when such a day comes, we're not going to be quite as embarrassed over the things that we've done. But where we've had hatred and anger and jealousy, we're pretty ashamed of these at this time. Now the indwelling Christ gathers the soul into a place called Armageddon, taken from the Hebrew term Ar-Megiddo, or hill. This term was justly chosen, for Megiddo occupied a marked position on the southern rim of the plain of Esdraelon and was once the greatest battlefield in Palestine. It was famous for two great victories, Barak over the Canaanites, and that's in Judges 4:14, and Gideon over the Midianites, and that's Judges 7, as well as the two great disasters, which was, of course, the death of Saul, and we'll find that in Samuel 1:31-8, and of Josiah, which is in Kings 2:23, chapter 23, verses 29 and 30. In Revelations 15:16, Armageddon becomes the poetical expression for the terrible and final conflict of the soul as it struggles to become divine. It is therefore applicable that the seventh angel now comes forth and empties his vial upon the soul, bringing great revelations and earthquake, such as was not since man came upon earth. So as we return to, he gathered them together into a place called in Hebrew tongue Armageddon, is of course the battle upon the hill, and using Megiddo as that remarkable place where the great battles of antiquity had taken place. I think most of you know by now it's only 11 or 12 acres, so it's hardly that we're going to have an all-out nuclear war there. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake such as was not since the men were upon earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. By now you've become well experienced to know that earthquakes shake loose everything that is inside of us, and that lightnings are great flashes of insight. When you open this doorway of the resurrection of the dead, you will experience things that's just almost beyond the imaginations of say, an average human. The power of this light that we bear can stop a speeding car. It can stop the rains. It can bring sun when that is impossible. You will see things that are literally miracles, and you will heal people, and you will prophesy. You will know everything that's going to happen for thousands of years, and you will develop healing powers that you never dreamed possible. You will also learn to discern cause and effect, when a person should be healed, when the experience is best for them to experience for their growth. Oh my, you have some wonderful adventures ahead. And so that is what it means by thunder and lightnings and a great earthquake. And the great city was divided in three parts, of course. That's the mind and the body and the soul. And the cities of the nations fell, and the great Babylon came into remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and mountains were not found. Everything that has blocked us from God in the past now is completely done away with, and there's no longer the hurdles and mountains to climb of the difficulties of human life. And we're not saying that human life is going to be a utopian dream world where we do not work and we do not learn. But when you know you're learning, rather than that God is punishing you some way, it becomes different. The mountain disappears. It perhaps is best said in the way, when on the left side of this I wrote, when John came to me, I wrote as John, he kind of gave it to me as he would give it to man in modern time, who had learned to read and write, who now knew that his planet was only a small speck in the universe of the stars, and that there were millions of suns and millions and billions of planets, to an age of technology when all men and women could read and write. Back 2,000 years ago, to have put such plain words would have been beyond the comprehension of those who could not read and write. And that's why this became in the protective custody of the Roman Vatican, the early mystery school. So, and the remaining impurities of the soul were divided in three parts: those of the ego, the dragon; those of the mind, the beast; and those of the body, the second beast. And these were destroyed. And the soul came in remembrance before God, that she be made pure by the exactness of his perfect law. and every obstacle fled away, and the false ideals of the soul were no more found. And a great hailstorm or devastation fell upon the soul from the indwelling Christ. Every stone, the full weight which a man can carry, and that which was enchained to the material world reproached God because of this plague. And so the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the nations fell, and every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And in those days, a talent meant as much as a person could carry. So it means that every stone is about as much as we can carry. And of course, we, again, fight against the way of God and try to follow the way of human will. And fortunately, we never succeed. He has won every battle so far. And I don't think you're going to lose either. And blasphemed God because the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceedingly great. This takes us to chapter 17, one which we somewhat mentioned last week, and that's called Babylon. I like this chapter. Babylon, harlot of Rome. The verse that I use to describe this one is Romans 13, 1 and 2. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. So when we resist this purification that's taking place, we're resisting actually the will of God. We will do our best. We will not lose. We do win because, remember, our champion, the indwelling Christ, is fighting the battle for the soul. We talked about Babylonia a couple of weeks ago, that it was a great and very powerful nation that had the Tower of Babel, and it had so many nationalities and so many languages, and people became so powerful and so wealthy that Babylon began to go the way of materialism and began to bring deterioration to the lands, very much like we've done in cities of Chicago and Detroit and Los Angeles and Houston, Texas, and of course now beginning even in Seattle, Washington. It is said that in the imperial opening of the 17th chapter, a most remarkable woman who is clothed with scarlet and purple comes forth upon a scarlet-colored beast, which is full of uncleanness. And I'm not going to go or start the symbolism of this because I understand that our time now is just about up. So I thought I would go perhaps to the end of the introduction. This unusual but touching chapter concludes with the power of the Lamb presiding in victory over those who have entered into the resurrection, and over the people, multitudes, nations, and tongues. In the end of the soul's struggle toward oneness, the divinity in it does come to hate its transgressions and struggles to transmute or destroy those things which are impure. At last it understands with great certainty that it was willed into matter by the power of God, and that it is destined to dwell in the dense domain of human life until the corporeal lessons have been learned. And as we close this day, let us remember the simplicity of meditation. O Father, who doth walk upon the winds, who lives and dwells in every star, who is the Master and Lord of the universe, come unto us and be the Lord and Master of our soul. I'll see you next week.